continue. So the first thing I want to talk about is, who are your current role models? You can share them. You can put them in chat, however you prefer to share. I'm just curious to know who your role models are, like personally or professionally, or if you just can think of them, bring them to mind. Another thing, can you name any famous people? Again, you can just kind of notice who comes to mind when you're thinking about famous people. I mean, I might have already kind of led the topic with the name of the webinar, but it's still worth kind of noting who comes to mind. We've gone funny spaces. There we go. Behave yourself. Simon Sinek. Yes. Very good. Very good role model. Did you know what you wanted to do when you were little? Did you have an idea of what career you wanted? That's all. Yeah. Excellent TV. Excellent. No. I know that I used to want to be an author and a teacher, and then a scientist. So I guess I've kind of managed all of them at some point. Did you want to work in STEM when you were little? It's quite an interesting one. How many people considered that they wanted to work in STEM? Yeah, not science, not Ian either. No, it's not gone to plan. Okay, can you name any famous scientists? So it might be, if you're a tutor, there'll be someone in the curriculum that may come to mind. Maybe some world-renowned scientists that are kind of famous outside of the science community. Marie Curie, excellent example. A lot of the time when I ask this one in school, it's Einstein. What's the scientist that seems to be the default scientist? Fab. So I wanted to know this question, and I basically played scientist bingo. I put the question into Google and looked at who came up, and it brought up this lovely grid of famous scientists. So obviously we named one of the top three there, Marie Curie and Albert Einstein. Did any of these other names come to mind? Do you recognise people on there? Isaac Newton, pretty famous. Darwin. Stephen Hawking, very current. Yeah. So it's worth noting, a lot of these are on the GCSE and Key Stage 3 science curriculum. You would learn about them at school now. We've got a maths one down here. Learn about at school. Quite a lot of them. Yeah, exactly. Quite a lot of them. If you look at their dates, this is the time that they were alive, but obviously also the time when they did all of their work. There's a lot of overlap. There's a significant number working at the same sort of time. It seems like a lot of science was happening in that time period. But it's also worth noting, not very many of those names are women. And also the ones that are women, quite a lot of them are in that same period that we've said. It's like towards the end of this record, when these women were getting their names out in the world as scientists. So this is why this talk came about. This is this whole problem with women in STEM. So Marie Curie, who was number 3 on that list, who Julie named, she was a physicist and a chemist, and she won the Nobel Prize in Physics twice, in 1903 and 1911, which is impressive anyway, except when you add to that the fact that she was the first woman to ever win the Nobel Prize. since she won, only 18 other women have been awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics, Chemistry, Physiology, or Medicine. And in that same time period, since 1903, 575 men have been awarded that prize. So we can see that there's this imbalance. It's not very often that women are winning these prizes. So STEM subjects, STEM careers, including maths, they're predominantly male fields. The work is done by men. The patents are filed by men. The publications are mostly made by men. And if we look at these statistics, we can see the choices that people are making with regards to studies and careers. It's very rare that women are generally the minority in all of those areas. But specifically, when we look at the choices around study, it shows us that women are quite proportionately choosing to study STEM bachelor's degrees, but then they're not going on to be in the STEM workforce. So what's stopping them, having chosen to study something in STEM, from going on to have a career in STEM? What's the block between those two steps? So to be a bit more specific, from this time last year, and this is the time period where people are making their choices around higher education, only 37% of the students who enrolled on mathematical sciences university courses were female. And then in the workforce, the women are usually around 26% of the STEM workforce. So it's around a quarter. Since the late 1990s, which was when I was at secondary school, women have earned about 57% of bachelor's degrees in STEM, and about half of science and engineering bachelor's degrees. No, 57% of all bachelor's degrees, apologies, and half of the science and engineering bachelor's degrees. So women are actually actively pursuing STEM interests, but they're not then participating in the science and engineering undergraduates in every field of study. So if we look at what they're actually choosing, it's quite frequently psychology, biology, social sciences. 24% women in engineering, 21% in computer science, and 24% in physics. So that's where a lot of the drop-off is, moving into careers, quite likely. It's showing us women do actually have interest in these things, but they're kind of, as you get further through studies, through your academic career, they're kind of dropping out of the field. There's loads more stats in here, and there's an interesting article that I was taking these from that I'm happy to share afterwards. I won't distract myself trying to do it now. But to me, when I look at these statistics, it shows me women are actually interested in these STEM fields, but they're not actually ending up being represented in the workforce. So I'm curious then to find out why that is, because that's something that I've been interested in for a long time. I'm a woman in STEM myself, and I teach STEM to teenagers, and I try to encourage young people to pursue studies and careers in STEM. So this is very much an interest of mine. So obviously I looked into it a bit more. Why not? So when I have conversations with people about this and said, this is what I've seen, why do you think this is? How can we change this? These are the sorts of things that people say to me. The opportunities are there. It's just up to women to take them. If they wanted to do it, they would do it. They obviously don't want to do it. So there's a psychologist at Glasgow University who's called Dr. Giesberg Stote. You can look him up. He has published his studies where he argued that it's unlikely to ever actually be balanced, because it's in women's biology to not be interested in things like this. They find them boring. They're more interested in things like biology and nature, and generally will lose interest anyway. That was actually written in a parliamentary publication, so that was fun. When you look at commercial statistics, females are the majority consumers of novels and stories and gossip magazines and that sort of thing. And men are the majority consumers of tech and computers and publications around gadgets and gizmos. So this is where opinions like Dr. Stote's come from, that girls are just interested in different things to boys. They're always going to pursue different things. So if we're looking at whether there are inherent differences in the brains of women and the brains of men, then to have a proper scientific study on whether that was the case, we would have had to remove any stereotypes they might have received, any discrimination, either subtle messages or explicit messages, any biased parental expectations, any media messages, or pressure from teachers, pressure from peers, and then long-standing gender-based cultural norms, to be able to actually study whether there was still a difference between the brains of men and the brains of women, which would mean that we would have to raise children in a complete vacuum from society and see what happened. And obviously that's not ethical, and no one's going to do that. So I'd say that there's probably more to it than what Dr. Stote is making out. And again, there's an article on that I'm happy to share. Aside from the fact that we can't put these children into little society vacuums and figure out what motivations they have that are pure biology, let's look at the information that we have currently to show us that might not be the case. So Mary Shelley is a very impressive woman. When she was 18 years old, she wrote the story Frankenstein that pretty much the whole world now knows. It's quite an interesting story, the way that she wrote it. She spent the evening in the company of Lord Byron and his physician. Given this is from 1818, yes, given that this was written in 1818, the medical practices there were very different to now, and the physician was telling her and Lord Byron stories about the research that he'd been doing that traumatized her so much that she had nightmares, and that those nightmares are what inspired Frankenstein. So you can imagine the sorts of things that the physician was telling her, and when you look at the history of medicine, it is quite scary. So yeah, it makes sense. But she literally invented science fiction, and she had a keen interest in the subject. So I think she'd have issues with this idea of girls not being interested in STEM. And again, there's an article on Learnosity on the creation of Frankenstein, which is really interesting. I'd recommend having a read of that. So when we look at what actual evidence we have, there's no evidence of any biological difference between the learning abilities of girls and boys. Not only actual IQ levels or ability to consume and retain information, but what that information is. There's no biological evidence to show a difference between the learning abilities of girls and boys. Gender plays no part in that. There's actually more variation between individuals of the same gender than the two biological genders as a whole. So there's no statistical significance between the two pools. What's actually more significant is neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to create new connections, and that's the foundation of learning. You're building memories by physically creating connections to things in your brain and being able to retain that information and organize that information. So when you're a child, your brain is better able to do that than at any other stage in your life, which is why children are so good at learning multiple languages. They're learning everything that they see around them. They're absorbing it all, and it's being filled into their brain, whether they're aware of it or not. So children who are aware that they can improve their ability to learn things with practice are much more likely to be successful in their academic endeavors, which shows us that it's just about what you believe you can do that makes a difference. In 2005, the astrophysicist Meg Urry, who's a very, very interesting lady, noted that discrimination is not a thunderbolt. It isn't an abrupt slap in the face. It's the slow drumbeat of being underappreciated, feeling uncomfortable, and encountering roadblocks along the path to success. So that is her perspective of being a woman in STEM. And if we picture that as the perspective of these women in STEM bachelor's degrees who are looking at moving on to STEM careers, is it any wonder that they don't choose to remain in that field? That they're feeling that they've got this ongoing slap in the face from the people that they interact with. It's not really a surprise that they're not going to stick around. So if there is no inherent bias due to biological differences, but there is a statistical difference in the numbers of males and females going into STEM careers, where is this bias actually coming from? It is down to access to education over time. And if we look into history, we can see not even that far back where these biases come from. So in the late 19th century, higher education colleges and universities began to accept female students. Late 19th century was not that long ago. Girton College in Cambridge opened in 1869 as a college for women, and that was the first residential college that existed for women in 1869. And if we look back at that list of famous scientists, and when a lot of these impactful discoveries were made and people were making their name in science, women couldn't even study STEM at that point. So obviously they weren't the ones involved. Other universities then began to offer courses for women, but they still couldn't get a degree. They could come and learn, but they couldn't actually earn a qualification. The first women that could get a full degree did so in 1878, which was at the University of London. Thank you very much. And then Oxford and Cambridge did the same in 1920 and 1948. 1948 was when my father was at primary school. So that's a pretty recent history. So obviously those attitudes towards academic pursuits being intended for men are going to still be sticking around in messages that are passed down in media, in publications, and in parental stories. But despite the fact that it was up until the 19th century, women couldn't engage in STEM learning, women were still self-educating, and they were looking for the opportunities to participate in STEM even before they were being made open to them, because whilst they're not that prevalent on that list of historical discoveries, their names are still there, and they spike up at the point where women were actually allowed to go to university. So after the point of access to education, you can see numbers increasing. In the Nobel world, we've also got this myth that when we see patents or publications in a single person's name or attributed to a single person, that person just by themselves, sitting in some dusky office, made that discovery, published it, and they're solely responsible for it, which isn't that accurate, because generally there's a whole handful of scientists, some students, various back office people who are doing a fair amount of the work, and the one person who has the notoriety and the funds to make that project happen is the one who is given the acclaim and their name on it. So it's propagated this image of this solo lone scientist who's responsible for these discoveries, which again isn't correct. And when we think of what happened, what was discovered by Einstein and Darwin and Newton and Tesla, they were very likely also working with women who weren't accredited for what they did. When we look at the people who were, they are almost exclusively white males. So we can see again where these biases start to come about. Again, there are attempts at changing that message by publishing the opposite message and inviting girls into science. This kind of painful. I don't know if I want to play this video. And to be honest, if I play it, it might just decide to move on. Yeah, this just decided to do more sensible things. I'm happy to share it in here in the pencil space. It is essentially these women approaching a man who's working at a lab bench. They're fashionably dressed. They're quite impractically dressed. They would not be allowed into any lab I've ever been in. The laboratory equipment that they're working with is imitating makeup items, and the logo itself, "Science, it's a girl thing," is written in lipstick. It's completely missing the mark of the message that women are equally capable, because it's making these women look like bumbling idiots walking around the lab, not actually doing anything useful and just giggling to each other. So I'm not sure how that was supposed to help, but that was actually a European Commission marketing campaign I mean, they really ought to know better, but apparently they don't. There are quite a lot of factors that build this message over time. So a lot of it probably people aren't actually aware of. Over a girl's lifetime, she's just absorbing all of these messages from the people around her, from the messages around her, from the media she consumes, that give her opinions about who she is and how the world works. And when she's making choices for herself, she's making them with that bias that she never was aware that she had, that isn't entirely justified, and that happened a long time ago before she had the opportunity to do anything about it. All of these factors that you can see on the board here, I'm not sure how clear it is actually, some of it's very small, come from everywhere and build this unconscious bias and these stereotypes in our mind over time, which lead to us essentially discriminating against ourselves because we have consumed this message, and it kills our own belief. Even if we're interested in particular things, we may still assume that they're not for us because these are the messages that we're given, and everybody else is given those same things. So attitudes, probably not maliciously intended, end up causing this marginalization and this discrimination when they're not justified at all. And it's actually important that we address this. It's not just about being fair, which is an important enough reason, but we have a lot of scientific development to work on. We've got a lot of things that need to be fixed in our world, and it takes everybody working in that to provide healthcare, to provide food security, to manage fresh water, to improve environmental pollution and biodiversity. Those are all scientific fields that it would be helpful to encourage women to go into. So it's really important just for everybody that that bias is addressed. So now that we kind of have a better understanding of where these biases come from and what kind of message we might need to shift towards, I'm going to share some pretty awesome role models with you who are women in STEM, who have managed to do things that change that stereotype. So first up, Marianne Croak is a very interesting lady. She was only able to access her role because she specifically sought out an institute that was renowned for its diversity, because she figured, being a woman and being Black, she was a minority that would not be openly allowed into the STEM field, but she was very interested in it. So she was very sensible to do so. And in doing so, she managed to create this voice over internet protocol, which is how we are now having this conversation over the internet. We would not be able to do this without Marianne Croak. Alongside what she made, this voice over internet protocol, which allowed like digital phone calls, essentially. This is how we have now FaceTime, WhatsApp video calls on our phone, and Zoom, and everything that allowed us to stay connected through the pandemic. And not even that long ago. So very grateful for the fact that she's provided that to us, and definitely changed the world for the better in doing so. And again, there's a video from YouTube about Marianne Croak that I will share on the board so that you can watch that later if you're interested in hearing more about Marianne Croak. Another very cool lady is Hedy Lamarr. She was already a celebrity. She was an actress, even without delving into science. As a lot of things are, her scientific discovery was motivated by war. So at the beginning of World War II, torpedoes were being launched from quite some distance away, and Axis powers were able to, kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? They were able to kind of jam the signals that between allies and those torpedoes to send them off course so that they weren't going to target anything that was going to impact their own military efforts. Not only is that not particularly helpful for us, it does mean that it then targeting civilians if there wasn't an alternative. Also not ideal. I mean, there's not much in war that is ideal, but we could do without that. This was during World War II. I'm not sure what specific year, but fairly early on in World War II. So she developed this frequency hopping technology, which we still use now. That was designed to be able to better communicate with these torpedoes and prevent them from being jammed so that you can control them all the way to target and make sure they landed where they were supposed to. This frequency hopping technology is what Wi-Fi is built on. And again, that's how I run my whole business. That's how most of the business runs. Like if Wi-Fi went down, it would be almost equivalent to our water supply going down now. This is pretty crucial to technology and development. It's advanced quite a lot of other scientific discovery by the fact that we can communicate internationally and share things basically immediately over the internet. That's had a big impact on the whole world of STEM. So what she managed to achieve has had a lasting effect, and I'm sure still will. So again, there's this brilliant video about her discoveries on here. A pretty local woman, Catherine Burr-Blodgett, local to me in Hertfordshire, she invented a lot of things. She has a lot of patents in her name, which is pretty astonishing because it used to be that women weren't actually able to hold patents in their own name. And if they wanted to file a patent, a man could challenge it and take the patent from them and file it in their own name. So a lot of the time, women inventors would file patents in their husband's name. They couldn't have a bank account either, so their funds would be in their husband's name too. So again, it starts to become quite clear why women weren't responsible for these discoveries. They were secretly. So Catherine Burr-Blodgett, this very industrious scientist, was actually the first woman who had a doctoral degree at Cambridge University in physics. We saw earlier that was only possible since 1948. So she was one of the first people to benefit. Among many other things, she invented the non-reflective glass, which now covers our TV and computer screens, which again is very useful. She covered it in a soapy film of barium stearate, is how she managed to make it non-reflective. But if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't really be able to use the computer that we're using now. And she invented entirely by herself all but 2 of the patents that she was awarded. So whilst this idea of a lone scientist isn't particularly accurate, it was quite accurate for Catherine. She invented also poison gas adsorbents, which removes poison gas from the environment, which was useful after World War I. Fortunately, that technology wasn't used as much, but a very useful thing to have. She invented methods for de-icing aircraft wings so they could fly at altitude without being at risk. And she invented improved smoke screens to keep soldiers safe. Again, a lot of these discoveries are down to military efforts, but not so much the non-reflective glass. And there's a brilliant video here where you can see Catherine making her patented products here. Eunice Newton-Foote is my favourite. I would encourage you to read about Eunice. She's a bit of a legend. I would describe her as a powerhouse, I think. She discovered the impact of certain gases on the environmental temperature, which essentially leads to our understanding of global warming and the greenhouse effect. She had the benefit of funds, so that's how she was able to do these things. Obviously, she wasn't able to go to a research institute and get a degree and be funded to make these discoveries. She filed her patents in her husband's name and used family funds to complete her research. When it was actually discovered in court that she was filing her patents in her husband's name, she was called out for it as being dishonest. And this is partly why I think she's a legend. She said, I imagine 50% of the patents that come through your court are discovered by women who have the good sense to know who controls the money in our society. And so they file their patents in their husband's name. I love her. I can't imagine the bravery that it took to actually say things like that, never mind to have done them in the first place. She's brilliant. And again, there's a little video that tells you a bit more about her life and her discoveries and how that's made an impact on the world today. And also, Kamala Sahoni, she was the first Indian woman to receive a PhD in sciences. She was the first woman that was allowed to go to University of Bangladesh. And in doing so, she studied plant biology. And her mission was to be able to provide nourishing food to the poor communities in India who weren't able to feed their babies. Their families were starving. And that was a an issue that really struck her, and she spent her research time working on solving that problem. So in studying biochemistry of plants, she discovered cytochrome C, which is a key enzyme in the way that plants create nutrition, essentially. And she studied the sap that came out of the primary food source in that community to identify their vitamin content and their vitamin content and their kind of longevity. So will these vitamins survive through cooking and transport processes? So she created this drink called Nera, which was highly nutritious and very cheap to make, and therefore very cheap to provide, which basically fed these communities with vitamins and iron to keep their babies alive. Absolutely life-changing, and the fact that she was allowed into university to complete that work meant that more women were subsequently allowed into the university and are now obviously allowed to study in the University of Bangladesh. Yeah, she's a bit of a legend. There is a video on my screen over here, so again I'll share that with you afterwards. She actually was on one of the Google Doodles one day. I think it was her birthday. She appeared on one of the Google Doodles, and you could have watched her video there. So hopefully now we have a better understanding of where this bias comes from, what factors were involved, and then what factors are involved in changing that narrative, the role models who have already done some of the work to change that message, and the companies on this page are actively involved in that same, continuing that message. Obviously Green Tutors is my company. I've also worked with STEMazing and STEM Learning, and highly recommend getting involved with them if this is something that you're passionate about. They run voluntary events in primary schools. It's mostly primary schools because the idea is the earlier you can change the narrative, the more impactful it will be. But it's also worth changing the narrative for everybody else, because I have these conversations with grown adults who tell me that this is a non-issue because they're just not aware of where this issue comes from. So it's still worth having the conversation with everybody. It's not just children that need to hear it, unfortunately. And some of these are American companies, so I haven't worked with them, but still doing great work on the other side of the oceans. Yeah, wonderful. I'd love to hear about that, Ian. So if this is something that is of interest to you, I'd love for you to come and join this Facebook group. If you scan, obviously we've used the technology that is available to us. If you scan this QR code, it will take you straight in. Otherwise, this is the name of the group. And this is the link for the group, which obviously is in the whiteboard now. I'd love to have you come and join us and have more of these conversations and share more of the resources that will help to change that narrative. And additionally, the STEM Tutors, the STEM Educators Academy is a membership for STEM professionals and STEM educators to join and share resources collaboratively to help support with education and this kind of drive for equity in STEM. So if that's something that you're interested in, I'm very happy to have you come and join us, either at this link or again with the lovely QR code. Yeah, thank you very much. Hopefully that's informative, and it is one of my favourite things, so I could continue talking about it, but I'm interested to hear other perspectives. If there's things that people would like to share, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot because nobody likes that. Obviously, if you're watching this later, do come into the Facebook group and share things. It's very helpful to continue the conversation. No worries, Ian, that's fine. You can continue sending the message or have a chat another time. Does this kind of bring any thoughts to mind for anybody? Is there anything that you'd like to share?
Just thought it was a really good presentation, and definitely agree that there is a drop-off. Having done maths at uni, there is a complete drop-off of women in STEM, and I did a few events whilst I was there, and you go to secondary schools, and it is a shame, but secondary schools almost, like you said, sometimes too late, because
Mm.
there were so many girls that I came across who were just like, oh, obviously I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And they were so, yeah, they were already set in their ways, which was a bit weird, but definitely understandable. And yeah, and then I worked in defense when I first started working in data, which is what I do. And it was very, very male dominated. And obviously there were some lovely men I worked with, but it was, I'll be honest, one of the main reasons that I moved out of defense was because it was me and 15 other men in every single meeting I was ever in. So, which was, yeah, I think it's really great to have women in those spaces, but I can understand why people move out from. I mean, I'm still in data, but I'm not in such a male-dominated section of data.
Yeah, it's a challenging one, isn't it? I mean, there's a whole other discussion around being the only woman in any situation is very uncomfortable. Didn't mention any of that, but yeah, it is a very uncomfortable situation to be the only woman anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Julie saying a bit better, but yeah, my experience was in pharma. I used to work with Julie, and it was different. It was pretty balanced, but it's still different roles. Like you say, that there's the data elements of things were more male, and I was in biology, which is very balanced. Yeah.
Yeah, Ian, I definitely agree with you about having good communicators being really useful, and kind of bridging that gap and definitely making it so. Yeah, sorry to chat so much, but I've having kind of moved from defense into e-commerce. I still obviously work with a lot of men, but they were closer to like marketing and things like that. So even though they were still very techie, they were better communicators. So it just made it a bit smoother.
Yeah, I like that. I do find this. I mean, I'm looking to kind of recruit role models from STEM fields to provide tuition at Green Tutors, and an element of that is that I have to teach them how to communicate with teenagers a lot of the time.
Just
Not
in
always.
itself.
Doesn't always go together.
I guess though it's also it's a bit disappointing that things haven't changed more in the recent years, because I feel like we've been having these discussions for, I don't know, I've been a STEM ambassador for over 10 years, and it feels like we haven't really moved the needle. I mean, a bit, and we talk more about STEM in schools and stuff, but obviously when you go to school, it's not specifically targeted at women or young girls, as the case might be. But I don't know if it's, you know, the perception, or, you know, the work-life balance kind of things, or if it's, you know, there's some really good TED Talks on, you know, why women perform better in certain situations because they've got a better emotional quotient, or, you know, generally empathy quotient and things like that. And you're just thinking, I don't know, you're just thinking we're missing out.
Yeah. I mean, it did make a lot more sense to me when I looked at the amount of it that is just this ongoing subconscious messaging in all of the culture and all of the media that already exists. And you look at something that was made 10, 20 years ago, and it already looks dated, because we have moved on since then, but so slowly that it's just like, really? Why did we even think that was a good idea 10 years ago? Like, yeah, it's so slow that I think it is about changing the messages that reach very, very young children, which means changing the messages that their parents are sharing. And that's best done through schools, because that's the only place we know that they're all going to end up. But there's already enough pressure on school teachers that they just don't need anything to share.
But I also think, because I'm part of mentoring programs as part of STEM, so MTR Pathways is one of them. And if you're in Surrey, Hertfordshire, or Scotland, and you have an hour to give, you know, this is a very worthy program. But, you know, I also think that schools because I speak to the young person I mentor, and I don't think they'll have a career in STEM. They're creative people, right?
Yeah.
And school is just not good for creative people, because all school cares about is English, math, science. If you're not good at those, no one cares. In fact, you're probably ostracized for not being good at it or something like that. So I think it's almost all wrong the way it's done. It's like no one can do what they want. It's just they have to fit some mold. And even my young person, bless him, he's not British. He's moved to Britain from a foreign country not so long ago, a language that's not even close to English. And, he feels really bad when he fails, and he's being told off for failing. And I'm like, excuse me, isn't school the place to learn? Failing should be the norm. It should be okay. It should be applauded. It should be encouraged. They never, when he fails something, I ask him, does the teacher explain, how it works, why it went wrong, how you went wrong, so that you don't do it again? And they're like, no. And I'm like, what the actual F, It's just like we're sending our people to places that tell them making mistakes is not okay. That's the whole basis of science and STEM subject. It drives me absolutely nuts. And thank God I don't have children, because I would probably kill the teachers. But it's just like, it's insane, and you breed people who are so afraid of mistakes that they can't admit they're making one. It's just insane. The behaviors in industry as well. It's just, you're thinking, honestly, this, and I'm not saying it's just in the UK. I've not even studied in the UK, but it's just like insane, absolutely insane.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I've never actually worked in a school, so I can't entirely judge the situation. It feels like it's a job that I would not be up for, but it seems to be mostly focused on behavior management, purely because there's so many students to support at any one time that ends up being their big focus, behavior management. And then if they have time, well-being and like actually learning things that they're interested in ends up being quite far down the list. I looked at I don't want to get too political, but given that we just had an election, I looked at the Labour manifesto and the messages around education. And there were some quite promising entries in there around encouraging numeracy from very young, and bringing in mental health support and wellbeing support as separate staff provision in primary schools, which, even if the same thing happened with Senkos and they weren't even qualified in special educational needs, so there's no guarantee that it will help. But the fact that somebody has that job title has got to be positive. Hopefully it'll improve. We never have any guarantees, do we?
I always find it really interesting. I have a few friends who are like math teachers and things. They're all female, bar one, and and they always say that it's really odd because the girls are, in terms of ability, just where the boys are. They're quite level, really. In secondary school, it's not like the girls are falling behind. It's not like they're not interested enough to even learn it. They are learning it. They are, doing as well. But it's just, it's what you said, Ian, in the comments, that it's just, maths isn't cool, STEM isn't cool. Why would you do it? And it's just so ingrained in our society to be, just think that doing something in STEM is just boring or like for boys, and just why would you do it? And and I feel, maybe it's to do with what you were saying, Julie, about there being, if you're wrong, you're wrong, and that definitely does come into STEM. It's a very kind of, that it's right or wrong, really, isn't it? It's less, I suppose, in creative, you can kind of have lots of different ideas. So maybe there's something to do with kind of not wanting to fail, and it being a bit more of a definitive yes or no, maybe.
I don't know. I wouldn't say science is definitive, though. I mean, okay, 2 +
maybe I'm
2
coming from math
= 4,
point of
that's
view a bit more,
definitive. But when you're creating a new drug or something, it's trial and error until you find something, and 90% of what you do fails, and it's just normal, right? And it's just like, if you can't deal with that, don't be a scientist, kind of thing.
That's true. Maybe I'm coming from more of a math point of view there, but you're right.
I guess
definitely.
Yeah.
But it's also, having had lunch with some young people this lunchtime at AZ on our site, and the people, the students will say, science doesn't pay enough. So they say, well, I want to do finance because I want to earn a ton of money, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I mean, you kind of have to agree to an extent that science, if money is your primary motivator, science is not what pays the most, right? Like purely practically.
It's true.
Which is a bit silly to think all I want is make money. It's like, okay, I mean, money is useful, you can't deny that.
Yeah.
But can it really be people's primary motivation? I don't know.
Yeah.
Not at all. There's so many ways that you can make money by doing things that are really uncomfortable that I don't think anyone wants to do. So we definitely can't make that our primary motivator. You have to enjoy ourselves.
But for some people it is, though. You know? For some and for young people, a lot of the stuff you hear when you go and visit things, oh, I just want to make money, I want to be able to buy a house, afford nice holidays and stuff, forgetting even about the part where they actually have to work to earn that money. It's just all this garbage about influencers and stuff like that. It's just making it look like life is, I don't know, something weird. I don't know. They feel like sometimes they're not tethered in reality at all.
Yeah. So Shed, in terms of jobs, health and social care is an easy access. It's understaffed, definitely, but not all know the career ladder that they could travel along. Yeah, I mean, this is why I started the STEM Stories podcast, because I don't think people are aware of what happens after school. What does a STEM career actually look like? You've got pictures of doctor, lawyer, maybe scientist, but that's such a general term that nobody actually has a clear picture of what it is. So it's really nice to hear from people who are doing those things what it looks like, and you can make more informed choices. But I guess if they only ever hear that bankers make money, which is a big message post financial collapse, then that's what they're going to think of first. What gives you status is either that you get to be famous, or that you get to be rich, or maybe you get to be both.
Rich and famous, yay.
I think it sounds like hell, to be honest.
But I think also, and you're an example of that, and I guess to an extent we're all examples of that, is that a qualification in science, whatever it might be, so not necessarily a degree or whatever, but leads to plenty of stuff, right? Because, and I know we work together at GSK, right? But my other half was a chemist. He's now a regulatory affairs specialist. I was an analytical scientist. I'm a science communicator. You're a tutor. Some people have evolved in even accounting. I mean, why would you do that? Who knows? But they have. You can pick up, you can do quality, you can do all sorts of stuff. And that's just, the chemistry fields, because that's what I'm familiar with. But I'm pretty sure that any qualification in STEM opens plenty of doors. And I think people often forget that where you start is just that, where you start. That doesn't, you're not committing for the rest of your life to one career.
Yeah. I mean, it probably is, as Hazel's described, that you kind of get a message based on where you start off. If you have a nice mentor and a support network when you start, then you can make positive decisions. But if you're in a situation that makes you uncomfortable, which is very much down to your management and the culture that they build, really, that can put you off quite definitively. Yeah. Not sharing any personal stories. Quite happy with my management.
I do think that's very true, though. When I moved from defense to e-commerce, things like that, I was at one point thinking of just stopping doing data completely, because I thought maybe it's data I don't like. And I kind of discovered it was more the environment that I didn't like. And having that kind of communication between teams, and a bit more, I suppose, for want of a better word, nurturing, I suppose, just within the team. And rather than, it was quite competitive environment. And I know that not all defense is like that, but the one that I happened to be in was quite competitive. And I think, having worked in different sectors since, I realized it was more where I was rather than what I was doing. So I definitely agree with that. It's definitely about where you start. And I mean, I was always encouraged to kind of go into STEM and things like that. So yeah, definitely. But yeah, I was always encouraged to go into STEM if I wanted to. So when I did get into defense, I thought, oh, I think it's a mistake now. But Yeah.
That's quite a specific. I guess the whole of defence seems to me to be quite male. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that women were excluded entirely, was it? So
it's definitely still that feel around it, I would say.
yeah,
And not all the people that work there, but there is a yeah. Working there, you do pick up on that quite heavily.
Yeah, there's probably quite a lot of things like that. So it's, I mean, from what I can see, I only have my the kind of line of sight of the experiences that I've had, and this is why it's helpful to have the conversations more widely, because everyone's got different experiences. I can share my own experience and the things that within the areas of influence I have change narratives and share. Because I'm a scientist, I'm going to share data and graphs and things that maybe help to change people's minds. But exactly like we've shared here, we've talked about the influence of politics and management and school and parents and peers. That's everybody in people's lives. So the conversations really need to happen everywhere, don't they? So yeah, from the male perspective, it's helpful. So being very honest, someone shared with me, this is a man similar age to me, approaching middle age, that he felt that all of this messaging around the marginalization of women and minorities made him, as a middle-aged white man, feel like he was the source of everybody's problems. And obviously that would discourage him from engaging in the conversation because it felt like he was being blamed. So I tried to be very conscious to not make that be the message that comes across. No individual's responsible. This is a historic message that's carried over longer than it needed to. We can get rid of it now. But it's the fact that we've had that bias fed into us for such a long time and it's stuck, that effort needs to be made to turn it around. Yeah, no one's responsible for it.
But I guess, though, the interesting perspective is that, like, it's almost like the way people are taking it is that if women, get more airspace in STEM or, wherever, whatever, women, people of color, different sexuality, let's call it global diversity and inclusion, whatever, get more space, that someone else has to lose. But it's not a win and lose. It's win-win. If you invite more diversity, everyone wins. It's not like your stereotypical white male cause of all problems. I'm going to reuse that, actually. That'll be funny. Is going to lose out because other people are going to come to the fore or something. It's really interesting, that concept of winning and losing versus everyone benefits if there's more inclusion. It's very weird as a narrative.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure where it comes from because it's a complete opposite view to the one I have myself. But I mean, that's why I have those conversations, because I want to hear them opposite views, try and understand where it comes from. But yes, I don't think it's correct. Fabulous. Okay, I don't want to take too much of your evening. Thank you very much for having this conversation. It was, as I expected, very interesting. Thank you. I love it. So I'm going to share the video. The whiteboard will be here, and the community in Facebook is open for everybody. It is called STEM Educators. What do I call it? Lab. There's the word. But it's for everybody to have those conversations. I think STEM really covers the entire world, so it's everything. So yeah, I'd love to continue the conversation, and thank you very much for starting it with me.
Yeah, thank you. That's been really good.
Cheers.